Omaha, Nebraska originally, actually. Graduated from Omaha Central High. Went to Iowa State, bachelor's in history and poli-sci, master's in U.S. history from KU. And I've been kind of hanging around the Midwest, specifically Central Iowa ever since. Currently I live in Nevada, Iowa. Run a team of 19 insurance professionals at a Fortune 100 company based in Des Moines. But as far as why I'm running, first and foremost, mid last year, JD announced he wasn't going to run again for a third time for the 4th district race. So started as more of a curiosity between my wife and I as to who would be next, not expecting it to be us. But by mid-January of this year, it became really clear that there was not going to be a Democrat on the ballot unless one of us decided to run. And so my wife and I were at the kitchen table, and a very normal, typical conversation for a Tuesday evening. Well, I guess one of us is running for Congress, babe. And I said, well, which one should do it? And she said, well, probably you, because you can handle BS a lot better than me. And here we are. And so, but beyond that, January 6th really animated a lot of my initial decision to run. Having a master's in U.S. history, I could talk to you all day, every day about the good things we've accomplished through our representative democracy. I am not naive enough to think that it's a perfect system. It's far from it. There's plenty of things to fix, but through our representative democratic institutions, we can fight the good fight for the people, and that's what I intend to do. So I'm running through the prism of what is needed here in the 4th district. So as far as democracy is concerned, defending our representative democracy, that concern that January 6th represents is amplified by who currently is representing us in Washington, D.C. So Congressman Feenster was asked a couple days after the January 6th insurrection what his thoughts were regarding the people that stormed the Capitol. He called them wonderful people that just got carried away. On a day where over 100 police officers were injured and people died that day, he voted against the Trump impeachment for his involvement in what happened that day, and he voted against the creation of the January 6th committee. That committee has shown us how directly involved former President Donald Trump was in the planning of that day. And yet, in early June, when President Trump endorsed my opponent, my endorsement rejoiced and celebrated that endorsement. We know at this point that an acceptance of Donald Trump's endorsement is a rejection of American democracy. And yet my opponent continues to dig in his heels and not face the reality of that. So beyond that though, to me, the number one concern that leaves the future of our district vulnerable are the massive population declines we've been seeing across the district. So we've been seeing plummeting populations for decades now, which leaves our hospitals, our businesses, and our schools extremely vulnerable. When you can't rely on those, your families leave, right? But this issue is specifically amplified again by who is representing us in D.C. because his policies are driving our young people away, and in turn are driving a lot of our parents and grandparents away. I get told over and over again, touring the district, that by young people, they say, look, I want to stay here. I want to build my family here. I want to build my career here. But I don't have the social infrastructure. I don't have the economic opportunity upon which to build that family that I want to build. So they leave. It does not take a genius to understand what the root causes are that are driving our young people away, and in turn are making us more vulnerable mid and long term. We have a lot of issues with affordable and accessible childcare and healthcare right now. We've got hundreds of thousands of islands that live in childcare deserts where it's extremely difficult to find affordable and accessible childcare. My opponent is a big fan of making the Trump tax credits permanent, which was really just a robbery of the U.S. Treasury. His friend, Governor Reynolds, recently signed a flat tax. We know what happens when you push extreme regressive tax policy. We just need to look down at Kansas about 10 years ago when Governor Brownback almost completely destroyed the state with that kind of philosophy. Experts in child care and health care agree that when you put us on a track towards really extreme regressive tax policy, you're hamstringing your ability to solve for these problems with the tax base you need to do so, right? And in Des Moines, in a legislature run by Republicans, their answer to the child care worker retention crisis, where our child care workers are leaving in droves because they're overworked and they're underpaid, is more work. Increasing the cap as far as the number of kids a child care worker would be responsible for, not addressing the root problem, which is lack of pay for the hard work they do. That will make the problem worse. Healthcare. I'm a big believer in a single-payer universal health care system at Medicare for all. You talk to doctors, hospital administrators across the state, they will tell you the same thing. They did not go to grad school to spend hours haggling with private insurance companies over getting very basic solutions approved through private insurance, right? And so beyond that, another thing that's really unique to rural Iowa is we have a real lack of mental health care practitioners and public health practitioners. And a big reason for that is college affordability is honestly non-existent. It's extremely expensive to go to college. And so what tends to happen is you have graduates from grad school, from medical school that have massive amounts of debt and really are disincentivized from planting a new practice in rural Iowa. They need to have the money coming in just to pay the loan bill. Okay? So I'm going to push back against that too. And then housing. We're seeing rents go up across the state. We're seeing homeownership more difficult to obtain, especially again with our recent college graduates who already have massive college debt on their shoulders. They're being priced out of homeownership. And we know that homeownership is one of the vital things you need to do to build your financial strength over time. More and more people don't have that opportunity. I have rejected corporate PAC money since day one. My opponent feasts on corporate PAC money. So the issue we're seeing right now with corporations buying up massive swaths of properties and flipping them to high rent locations and further exacerbating our housing crisis, that's not going to be solved by my opponent. Okay? If you overcome those obstacles in this district with no help from your representative in DC or your governor in Des Moines, you then have to find a job. I am endorsed by the AFL-CIO. My opponent is literally one of the lowest rated members of Congress for the AFL-CIO. When he posted on Labor Day a tribute to the workers, when he is rated at 5% or 6% out of 100 by the AFL-CIO, to me that was shameful. Absolutely shameful and dishonest. So we need to do more to increase the minimum wage to get it closer to a living wage, which right now for County Good, Iowa should be in the low 20s per hour in a two-parent household with one kid. And speaking of the fact that we're having so much struggle finding affordable and accessible child care, when you have very successful corporations in the 4th District advertising full-time jobs for $10 an hour, the math doesn't work. People leave, right? And then public schools. I'm a product of public schools. I'm a defender of public schools. I think public schools are a great equalizer. And again, we have Representative Feenstra in DC, Governor Reynolds in Des Moines, that are killing our tax base and making it so much harder for us to fund our public schools. The NEA just released a number that shocked me. We're facing a 300,000 teacher shortage in our country. And you see the impacts. School districts across the country having to scramble to find different ways to make up that budget, right? Okay. If you check all those boxes, again, with no help from your representative in DC or Des Moines, you then deserve to feel safe in communities that you live in. And my opponent is literally making us less safe. He votes against every common sense gun safety bill that comes across his desk. He voted against the Equality Act and marriage equality that's making the LGBTQ plus community more scared to live here. He voted against interracial marriage. He voted against the Crown Act that helps us fight back against discrimination that people of color face in the workplace. He voted against a very simple bill to remove Confederate statues from the Capitol grounds. So if you're a person of color in this district, you're more afraid. He has been gleeful about the downfall of Roe, but he wants to do worse than that. He's pushing for a federal abortion ban with no exception. And you have young people in this district saying, if this election doesn't go our way, they will leave in droves. And they're already leaving in droves, right? Climate change, I'll end there. Woo. Climate change. Recent op-ed written by Congressman Feenstra says, even if those, he likes the phrase, radical liberal Democrats, those crazy Dems, even if they get their way, and all of us are driving 50,000 EVs from Tesla, well, too bad, because there's no escape from our fossil fuel future, because our electricity grid is fueled by oil and coal. And he cackled, I'm sure, behind his keyboard when he typed that. If you Control F on that op-ed, he didn't mention wind power or solar energy a single time. I had my first joint forums with him this week in front of the Iowa Corn Growers Association, where I spoke truth to power. I was not in a very friendly room, but I spoke truth to power. And I got my congressman and your congressman and my opponent to admit that there's no way you can replace fossil fuel when we reach our fossil fuel extraction endpoint with biofuel alone. You have to ramp up the electricity grid. You have to invest in it. You have to invest in wind and solar. He has never admitted to that. I got him to admit to that, which may be one of the reasons why he officially declined our PBS debate offer today, because I think I scooped him. Anyway, I'm Ryan Melton, Democratic candidate for the U.S. House.